Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Ayin Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Kalani in honor of Nancy Kalani's birthday. It is such a zchut to have you living near us now. Your presence has brought so much warmth, joy, and bracha into our lives. May your love of learning continue to bring inspiration and light to all around you. Okay, we're going to get started with a few announcements. So we've talked about the Menachot challenge. Okay, so I'll just remind everyone it's starting right after Pesach on April 13th. Please spread it around to friends and family and get people excited about learning Gemara. Number 2, there will be no Zooms during Pesach, and all the shiurim, that means they've all been pre-recorded and they're all up on the site already. So you can either use the calendar, which you can find on any daf page. There's a calendar and you can click ahead to the upcoming days, or also where there's previous daf and next daf at the top there, you can just go scroll ahead to the next dapim, or basically the first day of Pesach, the next day after that, and all the dapim are up there on the site. Okay, if you follow by podcast, it'll go up the way it usually goes up. Okay, like on Erev Chag. I actually did it this year because there's a 3-day Chag for those outside of Israel. So already, if you're listening to the podcast, it'll come up on Wednesday, one after the other. Okay, so you'll have all the ones through Shabbat, and then Sundays will go up, Mondays. Okay, that's basically, if you're following through there, it'll go up more in that way. So that's in terms of Pesach announcements. There's a lot of shiurim about Pesach on our site, as I mentioned before, and there's new ones that are going up. Like yesterday, the one about Rabbi Yashimoni, one went up that basically connects a sugya that we learned on Samach Vav to Leila Seder about the matzah, and we're going to talk a lot about the matzah today, even it's going to come up in our daf. Connections between the matzah and the things we're learning about. There's Alana Steinhain shiur this week will be about Pesach Dorot and Pesach, like the Pesach that was in the desert, in the beginning, the first Pesach as they got out of Egypt, and the Pesach, the future Pesach, and the comparisons. Plus, there's lots of shiurim in the past that were connected with Pesach, and it all can be found on Pesach Learning there, or the new ones will be found in the Beyond the Daf, the way you find it, right, on any of the general new content that goes up on the site. Okay, I think that's it for announcements. Let's get started with our learning. What we're doing right now, we saw in yesterday's daf that there was a long braita that gave us the background to how we know. Again, we had to get to how do we know? Well, there's obviously 4 types of loaves because that says so in the Torah. But how much is each made up of? How many loaves of each are made, right? There's 10 loaves of each, but they're not actually made up of the same amount. Remember, there's 10 esronim that go to the matzah, the chametz ones, and then 10 esronim that go to the 30 other matzah loaves. Okay, and then even the oil we talked about at some point, a few days ago, even the oil is split unevenly. Okay, there's no oil in the chametz ones. There's half a log for the revucha ones, and half a log together for the rikikim and the chalot. Okay, so basically, it ends up that it's not exactly even everything. Okay, so we're going to have 10 esronim split up for 10 loaves and 10 esronim split up for 30 loaves. And we're going to have half a log for 10 loaves, half a log of shemen, and then we're going to have half a log for 20 loaves. Obviously, each one's going to have less oil in it. So already we see all these differences, and basically we started learning this all from the maaser, because we're going to learn from Truma maaser, which is 1/10. That went for the Truma. This is called Truma. That's called Truma. So we're going to learn that it said in the Torah 1 goes to the Kohen of each type. From there, they got to 10 loaves. Okay, then from the shtei lechem, we got to the amount. Again, we're going to start. We're still in the middle here, really, but certainly in the. Okay, what we did was we had the braita, which kind of said everything, but now we're going to have difficulties on the different sections of this braita. So then we got to, after we had the 10 loaves, then we said, okay, so the shtei lechem is 2 esronim, but 1 isaron per loaf. From there, we learned that the same one that's similar to it, from the word taviu, we said, well, taviu teaches you that what's similar, you're going to bring something else that's like this, which is also chametz. The only 2 chametz offerings in the temple were the shtei lechem and the 10 loaves of the chametz loaves of the lachmei todah. So, by the way, I just realized I should have told you this. For those who are aware of this, we don't say mizmor l'todah in our davening on Pesach. Why don't we say it? Because the lachmei todah, right, the korban todah couldn't be brought on Pesach because of the chametz loaves, and the mizmor l'todah is in place of the korban todah, and that's why we don't say it on Pesach, okay? So if you never knew that, now you see all the connection. So 2 esronim meant in the Shtei Alechem, each one was an isaron. From there we learned that each loaf of the chametz ones is an isaron, and that's how we got to 10 esronim. And then there was a hekesh, a comparison between the challah, right, the challah chametz, and to the 3 that are the matzah ones. From there we learned, 10 esronim there, 10 esronim in the matzah ones. Okay, so now, why don't we say it Erev Pesach? Because it could be eaten that day and that night, and we can't eat, right? You can't eat most of the day of Erev Pesach. You can't eat. Going back, I see you asked, just for those listening and didn't see the chat, but Becky asked about why don't you say it on Erev Pesach, and that's because also it was eaten on Erev Pesach, and you can't eat on Erev Pesach chametz from midday. And remember, it's a huge amount of loaves, so you'd have nothing to do with them. Okay, so let's get started now from Amar Mar. We're on the second Amar Mar, which is basically going back to different lines in the Braita, and we're going to have difficulties with all these lines of the Braita. Ne'amar kan truma v'ne'amar b'truma maser truma. So it says truma there, it says truma by there, and that's how we learn. It's 1 in 10. That's how we got to 10 loaves. So now they say lema mitrumat midyan, but in Midyan there was a truma when they had the battle with the Midyanim. They gave 1 in 500. So why don't we say that? And then, by the way, we would have 2,000 loaves. Okay, if you think 40 loaves was a ton, right? 2,000 would be insane. Danim truma hanoheget lidorot mitruma noheget lidorot v'al tchiyat trumat midyan she'ena noheget lidorot. That was a one-time event. Okay, apropos what I was just saying about Din and Daf, about the shear of Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Dorah. So also, right, this happened. It was a one-time event. So we're not going to learn a continual thing from a one-time event if we have a continual issue to learn it from, and that's Trumat Maser. What about Challah? Challah is 1 in 24. Okay, that would still add a lot more loaves. Okay, not as many as 2,000, but we would have a ton. Ne'elaf mitruma challah. Tana d'bei Rabbi Yishmael. Danim davar shene'emar bo mimenu trumat Hashem. Midavar shene'emar bo mimenu truma Hashem. If you remember, both of them say mimenu truma Hashem. They have the exact same wording. Whereas challah says truma, but doesn't say mimenu truma Hashem. So since the wording is identical by Maser, we're going to learn it from there. Again, we talked about it would be insane if we had that many loaves, because remember, you have such a short time in which to eat it. Now again, the idea we talked about yesterday was that the idea of having so many loaves is that you have to share it with other people, and if you have to eat it within that time, because remember, sanctified items have to get burned after. We don't want to ever get to that stage, so you really have to eat it all, but you basically share your simcha with other people. It's like nowadays we do what's called the Sudat Hodaya. Like we have a kiddush or something, if something happens and we want to share our happiness with other people. It's the same idea. Okay, luckily that when we do it, if we have leftovers, we don't have to burn them and ruin them after. Okay, so now we say, well, we're going to learn it from there because the wording is exact. By Rava. Rava now asks a question, and this goes back to the question I mentioned yesterday, which is, how similar is it to Truma? Is it completely similar, like the owner gives it to the Kohen, for example, or the Kohen takes it, right? Is it really part of the sacrifice, or is it more like a Truma? And now they say, to what extent? So they ask, Trumat Lachmei Todah, Rava asks, Chayavim alehem mita v'chomesh, or ein chayavim alehem mita v'chomesh? If you are a non-Kohen and you eat Truma, what happens? If you did it on purpose, you get death by the hands of God. If you do it unintentionally, then you have to pay the value plus an added chomesh, which is a fifth, which we just learned yesterday, right? It's really a quarter more. So you have to pay a quarter more. Now, is it the same thing here? What if somebody eats that one loaf, or the 4 loaves, right? But the 1 loaf of each type that's supposed to go to the Kohen. What happens? Do they get mita and chomesh? Kevandi takesh l'trumat maser kitrumat maser dami. Do we say it's exactly like trumat maser? So all those same laws apply. Oh, here's the other side. Dilma bo v'chamishito miet rachmana. It says there umetu by truma. Umetu bo ki yachalaluhu. You're going to die for this. What's for this? It's a limitation word. It means just for this, not for anything else. Maybe that's limiting, and not for lachmei todah, for example. And it says chamishito. It doesn't say a chamishit, which means a fifth. It says its fifth, which sounds again like just this one, not anything else. So we're not going to actually have an answer to this question. And another question, midamat or eno midamat. Dimua is when your truma falls into a pile of chulin, and it ruins the whole pile, right? The only thing you could do with it really is sell it to a Kohen for a cheaper price, because only a Kohen can eat the whole thing, because it's all we don't know where the truma is. So does this do the same thing? Would it ruin if this one loaf falls into a pile of chulin? Would it ruin it all or not? Teku. And these questions are left unanswered. Amar Talmud Lamar Tihiyena. My Talmud now. Okay, so now we had said, maybe if you're learning it from the Shtei HaLechem, the Shtei HaLechem altogether is 2 esronim, right? And basically you're going to do isaron per loaf, and we learned through here, isaron per loaf, 10 esronim. But maybe we should learn, so maybe they said, the Braita said, maybe we'll learn it from Shtei HaLechem that there's 2 esronim. Maybe here, all 10 loaves are made up of only 2 esronim and not 10. If we're going to compare it, we could compare it in a different way. And it was all learned out, if you remember, from the pasuk about the Shtei HaLechem, taviu, bring, and then they said that word was unnecessary. Well, bring Shtei HaLechem, and bring anything that's like Shtei HaLechem is like this, meaning the Lachmei Todah. And that's how we got to the 10 esronim, 1 per loaf. But we should say 2 esronim for the whole thing. So they had said no, because it says Tihiyena. So the Gemara asked, my Talmud, how did we get it from the word Tihiyena? Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, Tihiyena Ktiv. It's written with 2 yuds. The extra yud is to tell you 10 esronim. Yud in Gematria is 10. It's to tell you there's 10 esronim. And that's what we learn, 1 per loaf and not 2 for the whole thing. Ema asara kfize. So the Gemara asks kind of ridiculous question, or seemingly ridiculous question. Why don't you say it's 10 kfize? Kfize is some measurement. There's a debate what it is. Some people say half a kav. It doesn't really matter what it is. The point is, maybe it's 10 of something else and not esronim. Why is it a ridiculous question? Well, Rava answers pretty obviously. I'm a Rabbi Esronoti Barakatu. Well, the Shtei HaLechem is measured in esronim, so why are you going to start talking about some other measurement, like a half a kav, which has nothing to do with anything talked about in the Torah? So it's obvious they're talking about esronim, and once you say it's the yud is 10, then we get to our number 10. Okay, back to the Braita. Lamanu asara lechametz, asara lematzah minayin. So we got the 10 for chametz. Where do we get the 10 for matzah? Talmud Lamar al chalot lechem chametz kineged chametz havei matzah. So the way the psukim work is like this. It tells you what are you supposed to bring if you bring a toda, and it starts at the 3 matzah loaves. The next pasuk says al chalat lechem chametz. In addition, bring ones that are chametz. Yakriv korbanot zevach todat shlamav. We're going to get to the end of that pasuk later today. Okay, which is on the sacrifice of the toda of your shlamim peace offerings. Okay, we're going to talk about exactly what that means. But in simple terms, what it means is bring your breads, first your matzahs, in addition, the lechem, the chametz ones, and then it says with the sacrifice. Okay, it's going to be done with the sacrifice. Because remember, there's an animal sacrifice going on there. We've only been talking about the breads, but there's obviously an animal sacrifice that's brought with it. Now, the Gemara asks, how can you learn, okay, what they're basically doing here is what we call a hekesh, a juxtaposition. The matzahs are juxtaposed to the chametz. So just like the chametz has 10 esronim, all the matzah ones are going to have 10 esronim because of the hekesh. But the Gemara asks an obvious question, which is, how do we learn about the chametz ones? We compared it, right? There was a hekesh to the Shtei HaLechem, because the Shtei HaLechem said taviu. That was an extra word. That word is referencing basically the lechem toda. And from there, right, the chametz ones, from there we said, so the lechem toda is like the Shtei HaLechem. And now we're going to say, and the matzah ones are like the chametz ones. So now we're going to have a problem. We've already learned this a number of times. In the world of Kodshim, you can't have a juxtaposition on a juxtaposition, which is basically what we're doing here. We're juxtaposing the matzah to the chametz and the chametz to the Shtei HaLechem. So, or, you could start from there, the Shtei HaLechem to the chametz and the chametz to the matzah. How can you do that? So they answered 2 possible answers. The first answer is, Heimenu v'davar acherhu. Kol heimenu v'davar acher lo have hekesh. It's learned from there and from somewhere else. What does that mean? Well, learning from the chametz from the Shtei HaLechem is not really only learned out from there, because you also, in order to complete the picture, you need to start with truma. The truma gets us from 1 loaf to 10, right? From the 1 out of 10, gets us to the fact that there's 10 loaves. And the Shtei HaLechem gets us to, the 10 loaves are made in Isaron a loaf. So in essence, it's learned out from Shtei HaLechem and somewhere else, and also from truma. And anytime you have heimenu v'davar acher, where something is learned from 2 things, lo have hekesh. We don't call that a hekesh because it's not completely learned out from the Shtei HaLechem. So it's not really a hekesh, and then you can learn from there to the matzah ones. But that only works partially because hanicha laman damar lo have hekesh. Some people think heimenu v'davar acher is not a hekesh. But some people treat it still as a hekesh. If it's learned out by juxtaposition, even though it was also learned from somewhere else, still it was learned out by juxtaposition, and then you can't do a juxtaposition on a juxtaposition. So how are you going to respond if you hold that? So therefore they're going to give an alternative answer. Taviu ribuyahi. It's not exactly a hekesh. What's a hekesh? A hekesh is when you have two things, like here. We have matzah and chametz in psukim right next to each other. They're juxtaposed. We're going to learn one from the other. But the pasuk about the shtei alechem was just taking the word taviu. It never brings in the lachmei todah in that pasuk. All it does is say there's shtei alechem, there's an extra word. That extra word is just including another case. That's called a ribui, like an inclusion. That's not a hekesh. So therefore you could do a ribui and then a hekesh on it, and that would work. Okay, now we're done with that Mishnah. We're moving on to the next Mishnah. We're going to learn about other sacrifices that also included bread offerings. Hamiluim. In the days of the Miluim, they brought this ram offering, and with the ram offering, they brought 3 types of matzah breads. And not surprisingly, they're the exact same 3 types, is what the Mishnah says. Hamiluim hayu ba'im kematzah shebetodah. Now remember, there's no other chametz. So in any of these offerings we're going to learn right now, which is the Miluim and the Nazarites offering, we do not bring the chametz. Okay? Because remember, just the shtei alechem and the Thanksgiving loaves. But the miluim, habayubaim kimatzah shebetodah, exactly like the matzah and the todah, chalot urikikin urivucha. Okay, now we're going to see. Okay, I'll read you the pasuk already. There it says, okay, in Vayikra chapter 8, verse 26. We just read this last week. Umisal hamatzot asher lifnei Hashem. Okay, from the sal hamatzot, from the basket of matzahs that's before God. Lakach chalat matzah achat vechalat lechem shemen achat. So notice what's here. Chalat matzah, that we've seen before. Chalat lechem shemen, a challah of bread with oil. Okay, we don't know what that is. And rakik echad. Okay, and the rikikim. Remember, those are the flat lafas. I put the pictures up on the daf again today, so you can look at the pictures again if you want to remind what they are. The rakik is the one without oil, gets the oil after, and it basically looks like a lafa. The lechem chametz kind of looks like a flat pita and more soft than the other one or more thick than the other one. And the chalat lechem shemen, we're going to say, is the revucha. Remember what the revucha is? That's the one that's first boiled, then baked. You always just think of a bagel, but then fried. So it's different than a bagel. It doesn't really look like a bagel. It doesn't have a hole in the middle. But it's boiled, baked, and fried. Okay? Now, so the miluim had the exact same one. So obviously what's clear from the pasuk is we're going to have to explain how we got from lechem shemen to the revucha. Nizirut haytaba shtei yadot kimatzah shel todah. The nizirut came 2/3 of the amount that you used in the matzah for the todah. 2/3 of that amount you would use, right? Which is 10 kav. If you remember, it was 15 kav, so we're going to use 10 kav. Chalot and rikikim. Why 2/3? Because there is no revucha. Just the chalot and the rikikim. Ve'ein ba revucha. Okay, it doesn't have the revucha ones. Nimtzeu. Now here goes the math again. Asara kabin Yerushalmiot shehem shisha esronot va'od yan. It's 10 kabin Yerushalmiot, which are 6 6/7. Okay, the way they say it is kind of funny. They're mathematical, but they don't talk math the way we do. They say 6 esronim and then some. Okay, which is 0.67, as we know. Okay, 6 2/3 because it's going to be 2/3 of 10. Very simple. Right, 2/3 of 10 esronim. And then the 10 kabin is because it's 2/3 of 15. If you remember, that was the Mishnah we saw yesterday. It's 15 kabim Yerushalmi. Menahanim mile. Okay, so now I'll just read you the pasuk also by the Nazir. By the Nazir it says v'sal matzot. It says that same term, a basket of matzah. Solet chalop lulot bashemen and rikikei matzah meshuchim bashamen. Okay, it seems pretty clear. It only has 2 types, although the Gemara is going to have to darshan this, even though it seems pretty clear to me that it only has 2 types. But we'll see what the Gemara does with it after. Okay, minani mile. The first thing we want to know is how do we know that the miluim needs revucha, which is what I showed you wasn't clear in the pasuk. So now they want to know how you know it needs all 3, but clearly the 2 are going to be easy to prove. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Chama bar Guria, da Amar Kra. Okay, says Rav Chisda, says in the name of this, that the pasuk says, Umisal hamatzot asher lifnei Hashem. This is what I read you before. Lakach chalat matzah achat, 1 chalat matzah, chalat lechem shemen achat, verakik achat. Okay, bishlama chalot rakik rakik. Okay, the chalot are chalot, the rakik is rakik. We got that. Shemen ma'ininu, what is this oil? Lav revucha, is it not the revucha? Now, why would you call the oily one the revucha? Because what did I tell you before? The revucha has double the amount of oil as it has in each of the rikikim and the chalot. Because the chalot and the rikikim together had a half a log, quarter log each. And the revucha had a half a log. Okay? Besides, they're also fried in oil after. But so obviously they have more oil. But anyway, you use more oil for them. So it must be the shemen is the revucha. But Rav Avia doesn't like this. Matkifla Rav Avia, ema anta de mishcha. Maybe it's a cake of oil. Okay, this could be, the Mefarshim differ onto what this means. Either a cake of oil is some very oily kind of dough, okay, that's baked or something, we don't know. Or it could mean a cake of oil, literally, like oil that's solidified, okay? And you take solidified oil, and maybe that's what it means. Maybe a challah of oil is not a challah, like it's a loaf of, not a loaf of bread, but a big chunk of oil. Okay, that's possible what they want. Anyway, either which way, it'd be hard to say that's what it is, but he's basically saying it really isn't clear from the word that that's what it means. So we're going to bring a second explanation. Okay, we're now going to go to a completely different section, and we're going to learn it from the korban that Aharon brings, called the Menachot that we've learned about. The Menachot that Aharon brings twice a day. Okay, these psukim are very strange because they basically talk about the korban Aharon's supposed to bring every day, but it says Ze korban Aharon ubanav, his sons, which is a little bit strange. Asher yakrivu laHashem biyom himashachoto. Okay, that they're going to sacrifice to God on the day that He is anointed, which is also strange because it's actually every day. It then says he's supposed to bring a tamid every day, half in the morning, half in the evening. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So they say, what are they trying to? Okay, so they ask. What do they learn about the sons and on the day that he's anointed? What does this teach you? Teaches you the day of inauguration is like the day of the korban that the Kohen Gadol brings. Meaning, himashcho is the one who is anointed, which is the Kohen Gadol's offering. Ma'imashcho revucha, just like the Kohen Gadol on the every day has to bring a revucha. How do we know that? Well, they don't tell you this, but if you know the psukim, it continues and says after that pasuk about bringing it every day in the morning and the evening, it then says al machvat b'shemen teaseh. You do it in a pan with oil. Morbechet tiviena tufinim and chat pitim takriv reach nichach laHashem. So what does it say? Morbechet, bring it morbechet. Okay, so what do you see? It's revucha. That's exactly the revucha. So now they're going to say like this. What was the Miluim? It was the days of inauguration. So what they're basically coming to say is like this. What we learn from these psukim is that just like the Kohen Gadol brings a revucha every day, and it's mentioned here in these verses, but there's reference in these verses also to the day of inauguration, to the sons of Aaron, on Biyomi Mashachoto, on the day they become inaugurated. So just like Ma'im Mashcho Revucha, Av Chinucho Revucha. So just like the Kohen Gadol brings a revucha, also the inauguration is brought as revucha. And that's how we learn this revucha. So that's a second explanation, which is completely from somewhere else, but it seems to be talking about inauguration day, and the Miluim are inauguration days. So from there, it's obvious they brought revucha. Now we're going to get off on a complete side point. Rav Chisda. If these psukim are referencing also a Kohen Gadol on his daily, and also on the day of inauguration, so it comes from Chisda, and he says, Kohen Gadol mitkarev la'avodah, when he, on his first day at the job of a Kohen Gadol, tzarich shtei esronot ha'efa, he needs 2 esronim. Why? Echad lihimashcho ve'echad lechinucho. One because it's a Kohen Gadol and he has to bring every day, and one because it's his first day on the job. Mar bar Vashi amar shalosh. Mar bar Vashi says he needs 3 esronim. Why 3? And now we're going to point out velo pligi. They actually don't disagree. Hada avid avoda kshu kohen idiot. Hada lo avad avoda kshu kohen idiot. They're each talking about different scenarios. There could be a Kohen Gadol who already worked as a Kohen idiot, so they already did their initiation one a long time ago. Now, on their first day on the job of a Kohen Gadol, they bring the initiation one for the Kohen Gadol and one for the Minchat Chavitin. So that's 2 esronim because each one is an isaron. But if he never worked a day in his life as a Kohen, and his first day on the job as Kohen Gadol, he's also first day on the job as a Kohen in general, then Mar Bar Ashi says he brings 3. He brings 1 because he's a Kohen who's doing his work for the first time, One, because he's being a Kohen Gadol for the first time, and one, because Kohen Gadol, and he has to bring his usual. That was a complete side point, and it seems like nobody even disagrees with that. It's hard to imagine a Kohen Gadol coming into the job for the first time, never having been a Kohen, but I guess theoretically it's possible. So now we're back to the Mishnah. We're moving on to the Nizirut. So when we talked about the Miluim, we came up with two sources for how we know the Revucha, that the Shem in there means the Revucha, either because it has a lot of oil, and it's just obvious, but we didn't love that because maybe it meant a cake of oil, whatever that meant. And the second one was we learned it from the Mincha Chinuch of the Kohen Gadol and the regular Kohen on the first day of the job, right? And that's from the Mincha between the Kohen, we can learn about the Chinuch Mincha that they brought on the first day, that it was Revucha. Now we get to Nizirut. So the Nizirut came 2/3 of the matzah in the Toda, meaning you only have 2 of the 3 types. You don't have Revucha. Tanu Rabbanan. So the first thing we need to learn is, what they want to say is it's 2/3 the exact same measurement. Remember, that's why we said it was 10 out of the 15, because it was 2/3. How do we know it's the exact same, right? We know it's the same 2 types. How do we know we use the exact same amount of solet and same amount of oil? Well, Tana Rabbanan Shlamav, I told you we'd come back to this. In the Toda, it said, Al Zevach Todat Shlamav. Now, why does it say Shlamav in plural? It's only Shlamim in singular. It's one korban we're talking about. So Shlamav, L'rabot Shamei Nazir, La'aseret Kavim Yerushalmiyot, L'reviyit Shemen. So the Shlamav there comes to say, there's another Shlamim where we bring the same amounts. Again, not completely, because we're not bringing 20 of the loaves, we're only bringing 20, but the same amount for those 20 loaves of the Rikik and the Chalot are brought also for the Nazir. Yachol l'chom shamur b'inyan. Maybe it's coming to tell you all 3 types of matzahs. And once it's saying there's another shlamim just like this, maybe you'll say the Nazir needs to bring 3 types, the Revucha also. Talmud Lomar, so now we're going to have 2 answers for this. One is in this Braita, and one we're going to bring a different Braita. So Talmud Lomar, matzot. Because it says by the Nazir, sal matzot, okay, you bring a basket of matzah, and then it says which ones you bring. But the matzot teaches you that it only has these 2 types. Okay, how on earth does it teach you that? The Gemara asks, my Talmudah, how do you get it from there? That means it only has 2 types. Amar Papa davar shene'amar bo matzot lafuke revucha delo ne'amar bo matzot. Now you probably didn't pay attention to this, but in the pasuk in the Lachmei Todah where it talks about the 3 different types, it says chalot matzot blulot b'shemen, rikikei matzot meshuchim b'shemen. Both of them are called matzot, and then it says v'solet morbechet chalot blulot b'shamen. It calls them chalot. It doesn't call them chalot matzot. No word matzah is mentioned there. So they're not, even though they are matzah, right? They're not chametz, but they're not called matzot. So when it says sal matzot here, it means only things that are called matzot and not that type. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, a different version now. There's a different Braita that gives a different answer to that second question. How do we know that it's not also Revucha? Matzot klal. It starts off with sal matzot. That's the topic sentence. That's very general. Bring matzot. Then there's prat. It tells you exactly which ones to bring. Chalot and rikikim. Prat. What's the rules for klalu prat? Klalu prat. Ein beklal amasha beprat. Chalot and rikikim. Ein midi achrini lo. Okay, basically it says, once you have a klalu prat, it's only what's in the prat. From there you learn the matzot couldn't possibly include other things as well. Now you or I would have said, it says exactly what you're supposed to bring. Chalot and rikikim. That's pretty simple. But lots of times we have where it says 2 things and it really means more. So that's why we employ the klal prat, and that teaches us just those. So either we learn it from the word matzot, and the revucha isn't called matzot, or we learn it from the klal prat. Turning now to Amud Bet. Now we're getting to how does the bread get sanctified. Now the bread doesn't get sanctified when you put it in a bowl, like the minchas, where they go in the bowl, they're already sanctified. It doesn't get sanctified when you bake it in the oven, because all that is done in the chol. It's done with non-sacred items. Okay, the oven is a non-sacred oven. When does it become sanctified? We're going to learn right now in the Mishnah. Hashochetet hatodah. Okay, they're actually going to learn it. They're going to talk about an exception to the rule. But hashochetet hatodah lifnim. It's really what I'll already tell you this, which is when you slaughter the animal, and that's what we saw in the pasuk. Al zevach todat shlamav, right? The chalal lechem chametz yakriv korbano al zevach todat shlamav. You're going to sacrifice it with the animal. So the slaughtering of the animal designates the breads for this sacrifice and sanctifies them. However, there's limitations. So we're going to talk right now. If you slaughter the toda inside, but the bread is outside the walls. Walls of what? We don't know yet. We're going to have a machloket in the Gemara. But if the bread is not there, not somewhere, but outside the walls of somewhere, which we'll talk about soon, lo kadash halechem. The lechem doesn't become sanctified. Shchata ad shelo karmu paneh b'tanur, another exception to the rule. If you slaughter it and the oven, it hadn't yet browned in the oven. The bread is not browned. Okay, it didn't harden at the top like bread does. Afilu karmu kulan, even if all of the breads were browned, chutz me echad mehem, other than one of them, lo kadash halechem. None of the breads. All the breads have to be, number one, baked and ready. We'll talk about later, though, it maybe doesn't need to be fully baked, okay, just kind of crusty at the top. The second thing is, you're going to need for the breads to be inside some wall of something. We don't know what. So, it's the first question of the Gemara. My chutz lechoma, Rabbi Yochanan amar chutz lechoma beipagi, and Rish Lakish amar chutz lechoma hazara. Okay, I specifically read before explaining because we're going to start with Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says it has to be in the Azara, which is the place where the slaughtering is happening, the temple courtyard. That's where all the action happens. Has to be in there. Makes a lot of sense. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it doesn't have to be there. It just has to be within the walls of Beit Pagi. Okay, what's Beit Pagi? There's always a machloket about it. Do we mean the walls of the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount? Or do we mean the walls of Jerusalem, which already is much farther away, right? As long as it's in the walls of Jerusalem, it's fine. So there's a debate about how to understand Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, what Beit Pagi is. There's two options. Rish Lakish amar chutz lechomar hazara. Where does he get this from? Bi'inan al besamuch. Because it says al zevach todash shlamav, al means next to. The bread has to be next to, physically next to. Next to means where in the courtyard? It has to be in the courtyard. Rabbi Yochanan amar chutz lechomar beipagi ava chutz hazara kadosh v'lo bi'inan al besamuch. He doesn't think al. He says the bread needs to be somewhere, and it has to be in Jerusalem or maybe in the Temple Mount. It doesn't have to be physically next to. So now we're going to get off on a tangent relevant to Pesach, actually. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish already have this debate in another place. Why do we have to say, right, whether al is next to or al is not next to? Okay, where do we learn it? Well, there's a machloket somewhere else, and then we're going to say, what's the difference and why do you have to bring us that they have the same debate in two different places? Wouldn't it just be obvious? If you had it in one, it would be obvious you'd have the argument in the other, and then you wouldn't need to waste time telling us this. And then they'll explain why you need it in both. So here's the machloket. Titnan, hashochet et Pesach al hechametz over below taseh. Remember, the korban pesach is slaughtered on Yud Dalet in the afternoon. Now, Yud Dalet in the afternoon, you're already not allowed to have chametz, right? That's why we burn the chametz by midday. And basically, there's a pasuk that says, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Don't slaughter al, that's our key word, chametz dam zivchi. Don't slaughter your korban when you have chametz. Now, when you have chametz, where? Al meaning with you physically or in your house, at home. Okay, if you haven't gotten rid of your chametz, you can't bring the korban pesach, and if you do, you've transgressed this prohibition. So now they're going to say, "Shochetet pesach al chametz over below taseh." So the Mishnah says, if you slaughter the pesach while you have chametz, which doesn't explain yet what it means al, you have a negative transgression. Rabbi Yehuda Omer afa tamid. Rabbi Yehuda says it's not just dam zivchi as any korban you're doing that afternoon, which would include the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice you do in the afternoon. If you have chametz, also a problem. Now here comes the machloket Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Va'amar Rish Lakish lo lamei no chayav ad sheyeh o l'shochet o l'zorek o le'echa mibnei chavura imo bazara. Either the slaughterer or the one who's sprinkling the blood, or one of the people who are registered, remember you had to register for the Korban Pesach, who are registered for it, have with them physically in the Azara. If one of them has at home, that's not transgressing this prohibition. I mean, it's a different prohibition. You're not allowed to have chametz in your house, but that's not this prohibition. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, if you have in your house, it doesn't have to be with you in the Azara. Any one of those people has in the Azara, they've transgressed that prohibition. So now the question is, why do you need both? Tzricha, you need both. To eat mar bahi, if you had it just here, you would have said in the chametz case, bahi ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan to kol hechad ite b'surakai. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan only said it here because, let's say you have chametz in your house, okay? He basically says, well, if you have chametz in your house, you've transgressed already something. So this lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi must also be referring to someone who, you've done something wrong already, and now you're doing something even more wrong by slaughtering the Pesach. This is referring even to someone in the house who left chametz. אבל לעניין מקדש לחם, הם עמוד עלי לריש לקיש, דאיתה בפנים kadosh, abarai lo kadosh. But if the bread is outside and you're inside, you haven't done anything wrong, right? So maybe he would say, though, maybe he's going to say, outside, inside makes no difference in the chametz because you've done something wrong. But maybe when it comes to sanctifying the bread, maybe the bread really does physically have to be there. V'it marbaha. Now here we're going to have the same logic, just in the reverse. If you had it specifically and said they debate specifically in the case of the kadash halechem, you might have said, Bahakam or Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said specifically with the bread, because if it's not inside, it's not going to be sanctified. Aval Bahach ema modele Rabbi Yochanan. But when it comes to chametz on Pesach, maybe he'll agree with Rabbi Yochanan and say, look, you did something wrong by having chametz in your house. You're included in this prohibition as well of slaughtering your korban when you have Pesach in your house. So therefore it's tzricha. That's why we needed both machlokot to show they actually debated in both cases, and they don't agree with each other in various possible ways. And we're going to finish this section with Tanya Kavatei Rabbi Yochanan. There's actually a braita that supports Rabbi Yochanan's reading. Hashochetet hatodah lefnim v'lachma chutz l'chama bepagi lo kadash halechem. If you slaughter the todah inside and the bread is outside the walls of Beit Pagi, lo kadash halechem. It doesn't work. There you see a braita that supports Rabbi Yochanan's reading. Now we're getting back to the bread and how baked it needs to be. So shachatad shelo karmu paneh b'tanur. What's the source for this? It has to be crusty already. Detanu Rabbanan, al chalot lechem chametz yakriv korbano al zevach, milamed she'en lechem kadosh, and then came karmu paneh b'tanur. They don't really explain how they get it from there, but it seems to be chalot lechem chametz. What are chalot if not baked breads? They're not called chalot when they're raw. Yakriv korbano al zevach, more drashot here in this braita. So it says you'll sacrifice your sacrifice on the zevach, on the slaughtering. Milamed she'en lechem kadosh ela b'shchitat hazevach. That's what we said was the basis of the Mishnah. The Mishnah already was getting to exceptions to the rule when it doesn't work. But basically we're saying here, al zevach means on the slaughtering of the shlamim. So the slaughtering is what makes the bread sanctified. Zevach todat. Why does it say the zevach of the todah? This we're going to see in the next Mishnah, which is if you slaughtered it for the sake of a different korban by accident, right? You took an animal that was designated for the korban todah, you sacrificed it for the sake of a regular shlamim, let's say, the bread wouldn't be sanctified because it has to be on the zevach of a todah, where the intent was on the korban todah. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're switching topics to. We'll see, we'll get right back to our topic soon, but we're now talking about matzah on Leil HaSeder. What a great topic to discuss right now. So matzah on Leil HaSeder. Pesach, so this is talking about Pesach. Yotzim b'matzah. So it says you can fulfill your obligation on the night of Pesach with raw matzah. Okay, we're going to see it doesn't really mean raw, okay, raw, but we'll see what it means soon. U'b'matzah hasuya b'ilfas. If it's made in a pan and not like baked in an oven, but made in a pan called an ilfas, it's also fine. It's a pan that generally didn't use a lot of oil. If you fry bread in oil, you actually don't generally make hamotzi on it. It's not considered bread. So likewise, if you fry your matzah in oil, you're not going to be able to use it for matzah, but to fulfill your obligation because it's not bread. But in this ilfas, you could. Okay, we're going to leave the ilfas aside and we're going to talk about this raw matzah. My matzah now, what does it mean, raw matzah? Amarav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, kol sheporsa ve'ein chutim nimshachim memena. If you break it and there aren't drips of dough falling out of it, okay? Like, I make my challahs a little bit raw sometimes a little too raw for people, but there's nothing dripping out of them. They're baked. They're just kind of soft in the inside, right? A little bit doughy. But there's nothing dripping down from them. That's what we mean by matzah na. Amarava, now this is why we brought this, v'chein le'inyan lachmei todah. Same thing for lachmei todah. So even though we said karmu paneh, crusty, right, it could still be somewhat raw, but as long as they're not dough, there's no dough dripping down, it's fine. To which the Gemara says, pshita, isn't that pretty obvious? Well, no, because right, why would it be obvious? That we would, that the same would be true for lachmei todah, and they think it's obvious because hachalechem tiv, hachalechem tiv. That's called lechem oni, and this is called lechem matzah. So we assume, right, it will be the same from the lechem word. So they say, well, ma'u detema echad amarachmana shelo yitol parus v'hakeman deprisa damya kamashmala. You might have thought it says you have to give one to the Kohen. Now, what does one mean? We learned already. It can't be broken. It can't be like a slice. Now, I'll go back to my raw challahs. Sometimes if they're a little too raw, what happens? They break very easily. So if you have a matzah that's too raw, you might, even though there's not dough dripping out, it still could break, and maybe it won't be part of this because it says echad. Echad means whole. No, it could be whole even if it's easily breakable, right? That's what it comes to teach you, kamashmalan, that this is sufficient for the lachmei todah. Okay. Now we're going to move to another machloket about lachmei todah, and it really doesn't have to do with our topic. It's something we learned about a while ago, but we're going to give 4 explanations to this machloket, and it's going to have to do with, perhaps it'll have to do with, the knife of the shechita, which basically, when you're slaughtering with the knife, that's what sanctifies the bread. Now, how do you sanctify things? You sanctify them with a sacred vessel. What's the vessel here? The knife. Okay, we've talked about this before. The sakin, the knife, is actually a vessel. Now, it's a little bit weird because a vessel usually is something that holds something, and the knife doesn't hold anything. And we're going to talk about that within the sugya, and that's why we're here, because the Mishnah all talked about how the slaughtering sanctifies the bread, even though right now it's not going to look so connected. Itmar. So we have an introduction to a machloket Amoraim between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Todah shechatal 80 chalot. If you did your todah, you sacrifice the animal on 80 loaves. Now that doesn't work because 80 loaves, you don't do 80 loaves, you do only 40. So Chizkiah amar kachu 40 mitoch 80. 40 out of 80 are sanctified. Okay, we saw this whole sugya it was daf mem something. Okay, let me just look. Mem chet. Okay. So Chizkiah said 40 are sanctified. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kachu 40 mitoch 80. 40 out of 80, no, we don't sanctify 40 out of 80. None are sanctified. This didn't work. Amar Rabbi Zera. Okay, so now we're going to have 4 explanations. Rabbi Zera, Abaye, and 2 different versions of Rav Papa, 2 actually complete opposite versions of what he said. So Amar Rabbi Zera, Hakom modim hechad amar likdashu 40 mitoch 80 kachu. Everybody agrees that if you said, here's 80, but I only want 40 of them to be sanctified, of course that works. And if I said, everyone's going to agree that if I said, Al yikachu 40 elim ken yikachu 80, I don't want 40 to be sanctified unless all 80 can be sanctified. For sure, that doesn't work. Lo kachu, because you can't sanctify 80. There is no such thing. Ki pligi, so what's the machloket? Bistama, if you didn't specify whether you wanted 40 of them or 80 of them, you just brought 80, you didn't say what you wanted, then there's a machloket. Mar savar la'achrayu kamechaven. So Chizkiah says, you meant just to have 40 as backup. So all you really meant was that 40 be sanctified and 40 were backup in case something happened to them. Umar savar lekorban gadol kamechaven. And Rabbi Yochanan says this doesn't work because you obviously meant to bring 80 and there is no such thing. It doesn't work. Abai amal. Now here you have to change the wording. It doesn't make sense the way it says it. It should be dekule alma, not lachrayu kamechaven, but lekorban gadol kamechaven. Okay? Abai says no. Everyone agrees. Second way to explain the machloket. Everyone agrees you intended for 80. But what's the debate? A very interesting debate. B'klei sharei bekachim shalom midat kamipalge. The machloket is, does sanctified vessels sanctify without your intent? Meaning, it doesn't matter what you intended. It's a matter does the sanctified vessel sanctify anyway? So mar savar klei sharei bekachim shalom midat. So Chizkiah says they sanctify anyway. So even though you meant for 80, the klei sharet worked the way it's supposed to work. The sakin, as you slaughtered it, it sanctified 40 of the 80. And it's done. It doesn't matter. That's not what you meant. Umar savar klei sharet emakachin elamidan. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. If you intended 80, the knife didn't do it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to sanctify unless that was what you intended. Which is interesting about intent. This almost puts intent to the side, according to the first opinion. It doesn't matter what you intended. Rav Papa Amar. Here comes Rav Papa number 1. Everyone agrees that he's building on the previous. You brought it lekorban gadol. Everyone agrees that klei sharet mekachim shalom midat. It doesn't matter what you thought. The klei sharet works to do it right. Okay, but what's the problem here? Hacha b'sakin kamipalge. But the machloket is what's the status of a knife. Mar savar sakin kadesha klei sharet. The first opinion says Chizkiah that it works. A sakin is no different than a regular sanctified vessel. Umar savar, but Rabbi Yochanan says no. A klei sharet generally works to sanctify, regardless of what you're thinking. But a sakin, kevan deleit leitoch and a mekadesh, klei sharet, it's not exactly like a klei sharet because it doesn't hold anything. It doesn't have a bowl, what we call a klei kibul. Doesn't accept anything in it. So it's different. It's weaker. Okay, wait till you hear Rav Papa II. He's going to say the opposite. Ikeda Amre. Some people say Rav Papa Amar de Kule Amaklei Sharei Makachin Elamidat. V'hacha b'sakin kamipalge. The machlok. Okay, so according to Rav Papa II version, it doesn't work a klei sharei without your knowledge. Intent is super important. If you intended 80, for sure it doesn't work. So then why would it work here? Well, a general klei sharei doesn't work to sanctify, but hacha b'sakin kamipalge. Marsavar sakin alima mi klei sharei. One opinion is sakin is stronger than a klei sharei. Why is it a better vessel? Right? It's actually taking the same thing and flipping it. Because it doesn't have a clay kibul, and yet it works as a sanctified vessel. That must mean it's got superpowers almost, right? It's more powerful than a regular one, because a regular one won't be good unless it can hold something. And the sakin is a clay sharet, even though it doesn't hold anything. So therefore, it actually is the only vessel that could sanctify against someone's will, okay? Not having to do with anyone's intent. But Mar Savar, Sakin lo alima lemi klei sharei, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's no different than a klei sharei, and therefore it only is going to do it with your knowledge. You wanted 80, it's certainly not going to work. So that was 4 different options of understanding. Okay, we're going to end here today. We'll start with the next mission in tomorrow's daf. So let's just review what we did. We took that Braita, which gave all the background for how we got to all the different pieces, the building blocks, to get to all the details we wanted about the korbanot tamid, the korban todah, how many loaves, how much in each loaf, how much for each type, how many different types, all that. We then went through a slew of questions on different sections of the Braita and resolved them. Then we got to the Miluim and the Nazir, and we brought the sources for how do we know that that has 3 types, including the Revucha, and the Nazir only has 2 types, and yet the 2 types are the exact same of the content of, the quantity of the 2 Rikikim and Chalot of the Toda, and we saw the sources for that. Then we moved to the slaughtering, and we saw all these exceptions to the rule where the slaughtering doesn't sanctify the bread if the bread's outside the walls, which it was a machlok at Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish based on how they understand the word al. From there we got to a different machlok about al. Is al b'samuch next to, or is al not necessarily next to? Why do we need both machlokot if they really seem to be saying the same thing, which we then explained. And then we got to the baking. How baked do they need to be, the breads, in order to be considered baked, even somewhat raw? And we learned the same halachot for matzah on Seder night apply here. I hope no one's really eating raw matzah, but note that you could if you wanted to. And I've never seen them selling them. And then we get to the machloket about the shmonim and the arba'im, and that was all because it's all about the bread sanctifying, the slaughtering the knife being the klei sharet that sanctifies, and we had all different versions of, does it do it against the person's will or not? Is a knife any different, any worse, or any better than a regular vessel? According to all the different interpretations, we saw all the different possibilities. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Reminder about no Zoom throughout Pesach, and reminder that all the Pesach shirim are up if anybody wants to get ahead. With that, we'll still learn regular on Tuesday and on Wednesday morning, and those dapim will go up as usual in the morning. Wishing everyone a good day, and b'sorot tova.